Hello, everyone, and welcome to InfoSec Leadership by InfoSec Relations. I'm Samarkrita, a volunteer host for today's session, and today's guest has seen this build from more angles than almost anyone, and I've been looking forward to this conversation. Jason Rivera started his career as a U.S. Army intelligence officer, running offensive cyber operations at the NSA. He went on to build a threat intelligence and security operations program at Deloitte for Fortune 500 companies and government agencies. Then spent years at CrowdStrike tracking nation state adversaries. Today, he is a field CISO at SimSpace, where he works with the governments and large enterprises on whether the teams and their tools actually hold up against real attacks. Please welcome Jason Rivera. Jason, thank you so much for being here and making the time. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to the session.
Yeah. Before we actually get into the questions, I'd like you to give the floor to take us through how you actually got from Army to where you are now.
Sure. Yeah. So when I started my career in the Army, I was actually doing traditional intelligence. So think of things like whether it be counterterrorism or understanding foreign adversarial systems. And towards the latter half of my Army career, so for that 7 years, I ended up being stationed within US Cyber Command, where I did intelligence support through various cyber operations. And that's kind of how I got into the offensive side. I was in something called a combat mission team, where basically we support different combatant commands and create what would be cyber effects in order to support combatant command objectives. So things that might control adversarial, just maritime, air defense, planes, stuff like that, right? We want to affect the systems. And so that's kind of how I got my start, very offensive minded. I then went to Deloitte where I took all of that offensive experience, but then applied it from a defensive standpoint. And I had the opportunity to build threat intelligence programs and SOC programs for several, amazing Fortune 500 organizations, as well as government agencies. I got to build out some of the threat intel programs for some of the largest government agencies in the world, particularly within the law enforcement space. But then also was able to work in the banking space, telecom, medical. I got a very wide variety of the different problems that different sectors experience. From there, I went to CrowdStrike, where I ran their intelligence solution engineering team, but then also was responsible for the threat hunting and vulnerability management products. And so CrowdStrike was a great experience because it helped me experience the defensive side of everything. Uh, Easily, CrowdStrike is one of the most effective cybersecurities, not only currently in existence, but in history, right? I can't imagine a more effective cybersecurity capability as a platform right now than CrowdStrike. So that was definitely a great experience. I learned a lot there. And since then, I've been focused on what I'm doing at SimSpace, where I'm trying to figure out how do we simulate things to figure out what might happen in the future, right? Because we're seeing the
Right.
adversary, we're seeing how they're growing. The adversary is very effectively using AI to increase their speed, to increase the scale and volume of attacks, and to increase the sophistication of attacks. And they're doing
Hmm.
so not at a linear rate, but at an exponential rate, right? And so one of the concepts that we're exploring here at SimSpace is how do we create training, testing, and validation scenarios for these different AI agents on the defensive standpoint, right? How do we accelerate our own defensive capabilities in the same way that the adversary is accelerating their offensive capabilities? And so I'm very focused on that problem set. And that's why I'm very excited about the conversation today. I think some of the stuff that you guys are focused on is also very similar to what we're focused on here at SimSpace.
Right. So that's great context. Thank you so much. But let's start from the beginning because I think you started from the offensive side. If we have all our facts straight. Let's jump into the first question then. So you spent years running offensive operations against nation state targets before you ever moved to the defensive side, right? What was the first thing you noticed about how organizations protect themselves that looked completely different from how you had been trained to attack them?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's different, right? And the way that you protect yourself depends not only on your skill and your budget, right? How many people can I have? What can I afford? How good are these people? Of course, those are factors, but it also depends a lot so on your critical assets that you are defending. And so, this idea of critical assets, or some people call it crown jewels, that really is the foundation of your defense, right? Like if you're a hospital, then the number one thing that must happen is MRI machines, dialysis machines, x rays, the things that are keeping people alive, those systems must not be compromised. private healthcare information must not be compromised. So for a hospital, they're focused on those things. Whereas like an oil and gas company or an electrical power company, very different focus, right? Now we're talking about ICS SCADA systems, programmable logic controllers, the things that provide power, the things that provide water. And that is a different protection strategy. Whereas a government entity, they're focused on national security information, classified information. And so that in of itself now implies a different protection strategy. And so from an offensive mindset, what I realized is that no one target is the same. And therefore, no one attack strategy must be the same. The attacks that work are the ones that are thoughtful and well planned, and the ones that are highly targeted and highly bespoke to the target, right? And I think that's one of the
Mhm.
reasons why the United States excels, not only within the cyberspace, but in all domains of warfare. They're very focused on precision, they're very focused on achieving the objective. And so if I think about what the offensive experience did for me, it made me very objective focused. And what I realized in the process was that my ability to apply my objectives was very much so a function of how the defender defended themselves. And so to get back to the core of your question, it really depends, right? How you defend yourself depends on not
Mhm.
only your skill, capability, budget, time, but also what are you defending? And then all that changes depending on who you are.
Yeah. So then what is that one thing security teams consistently do that makes an attacker's job actually easier? Something like most of them do not even realizing that they're doing.
Yeah. The thing that security professionals consistently do to make it easier for attackers is professionals often fall into the trap of tunnel vision. They have a little
Mhm.
checklist. They think if they do the checklist and they do all the right things, oh, I bought my EDR, I bought my firewall, I'm doing alerts and triage, I'm doing threat hunting, I'm doing incident response. But then the question is not just are you doing it, but are you doing it well? Are you doing it correctly? Are you doing it in a manner that's actually going to defend yourself? Or are you doing it in a manner that's going to maybe achieve compliance and maybe make your boss happy, but you're not really affecting what you're trying to accomplish? You're not really defending the assets that you want to defend. Every single
Mm.
breach that has happened pretty much every breach that happens is always a surprise, right? No CISO actually believes they're going to get breached next week. A breach is always a strategic surprise. And so I would argue that the main thing that anybody does incorrectly when they get breached or when they fail to defend themselves is they've miscalculated. They miscalculate on two fronts. The first front they miscalculate on is the adversary themselves. They don't understand the adversary. They don't understand what the adversary is capable of. But then that misunderstanding and that inability to understand what the adversary is doing is then further amplified when not only they don't understand the adversary, but then they don't know what they should do about it, right? You're going through the motions and the motions feel good, but the motions aren't actually what's going to protect you in real life. And so miscalculation, if I were to put it all in one word, miscalculation is always the reason for a breach. And it's the one thing that we always try to focus on as defenders, right? How do we miscalculate less? Which is why, again, cyber range is for what I do, right? Having a cyber range to where you can forecast those scenarios, to where you can simulate different permutations of what might happen reduces the probability of miscalculation.
Yeah, right. So before we move to the next question, I just want to quickly ask, like, was there an assumption from your NSA days that turned out to be wrong once you saw it from the other side?
I mean, there are many assumptions, I think, that not only me at a personal level realize to be wrong, but I think
Mhm.
assumptions in general from an entity as vast as the United States and the Department of Defense or the Department of War, as it is now called, they operate on assumptions, but those assumptions change, right? The battlefield changes. The battlefield changes not only in terms of technological change, but also in the change of dynamics. I mean, if you look at the use of unmanned aerial systems or drones within both the
Mhm.
Ukrainian theater of conflict as well as the GCC and Iranian theater of conflict, I think one major assumption is that even with drone warfare, we thought, I think when I say we, I mean the United States, we thought the bar was a little bit higher than it was in real life, right? We miscalculated these low cost drones, hooking up a drone to a fiber optic cable and not having the drone emit a signature, right? So I think miscalculation often occurs not only in the physical sense, but then of course the cyber sense, right? And those miscalculations are further amplified by technological change. So for example, when AI first came out, I remember ChatGPT coming out in 2023, right? I couldn't imagine we'd be where we are today, that agents would be doing the things that we're making. And so when I think about the idea of assumptions that I made that are incorrect, I mean, sure, I made tons of assumptions that were incorrect, but I think we all do, right? And that's the nature of assumptions, is that you make them, you have to operate on them because there's lots of unknowns, but then the battlefield dynamics and technological change force us to adapt our assumptions. So for me, it's less about like, was I right or wrong, or whether whether anyone's right or wrong, right? The question is, how quickly can we see it, and how quickly can we adapt so we don't get beaten on the battlefield, whether that battlefield be kinetic slash physical or within the cyber domain.
Okay, yeah. So clearly, from what you're saying, that gap between how defenders see themselves and how an attacker sees them shows up clearly in your current work, right? Where organizations kind of get tested under real condition. My next question for you then be, watch organizations get tested under realistic attack conditions, right? Please, could you walk us through a case where a team looked strong on paper, mature tooling and documented playbooks, and still fell apart?
Yeah, I mean, there's many cases, right? I mean, we to some degree, you read about these all the time. Think about all the breaches that are publicly announced. The telecom
Mhm.
sector early last year in 2025, done by an adversary referred to as Salt Typhoon, which is a Chinese nation state threat focused on the telecom sector. That was one major miscalculation, right? And these are when you think about the Fortune 500 telecom, entities in the United States, these are very well funded, very mature, very strong organizations. But even at the highest tiers, miscalculation still happens. And so, I think you read about these and you see them, and sometimes it's one of those things where it's almost inevitable, if that makes sense. Because like when you think about the nature of offense versus defense, the defensive side has to get it right every single time, right? The offensive side only has to get it right one time. And so not only
Mhm.
does the offensive side have that advantage where they only have to make one victory to achieve a victory in its entirety, but then they also have the first mover advantage. Again, one of the interesting things about the cyber domain relative to the physical domain, in the physical, you see things coming, right? We can observe, we have satellite imagery, we have signals intelligence, we're able to see things as they're moving. In the cyber domain, it is very difficult to see movement. And there, because it's difficult to see movement, you see the strategic surprise happening. And so, I think you just have to look in the news to see all these things that aren't working out right. And it's happening more and more at a faster and faster rate, which I think is one of the urgencies behind the adoption of AI. Not necessarily just because, oh, yeah, we're going to adopt it and it's going to make us better, faster, cheaper, but it's inevitable because if we don't do it, it's going to happen to us. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess that would be my answer, right? The simplest way to see these failures in real life is just to simply Google it, read about it. It's happening all the time to very large entities, not only in the Fortune 500, but large governments throughout the world constantly, to include the United States, are regularly experiencing attacks and regularly experiencing breaches. And to me, I think this indicates a fundamental challenge in how we approach the problem, because cybersecurity is inherently a responsive discipline. Right? You get the alert, you respond to the alert. It is called incident response. Threat hunting implies that you're hunting for something that has already happened. Every single defensive discipline implies response. But when the rate of attack continues to increase, right? So there's this thing called breakout time, which is the amount of time it takes the adversary once they gain access to move laterally. Because once the adversary moves laterally, they have basically them expanded access. Right now, they can go to multiple machines. They have multiple points of presence. And so I remember when I first joined CrowdStrike in 2018, the breakout time was like the fastest breakout time was like 18 minutes and 51 seconds or something like that. And it was done by the Russian GRU, which is their military intelligence. Last year, according to their global threat report, the fastest breakout time was 27 seconds. And so think about that, right? In a 7-year time span, it went from 18 minutes and 51 seconds to 27 seconds. And the very obvious question I'll throw to you in the audience, where does that breakout time go in the next 5 years? Goes to zero, right above zero, right? And so let's think about that for a second. What does the world look like when the breakout time is right above zero? There is no more alert triage. There is no more incident response. The way that we think of these things ceases to function in their current state. And so for me, that's the urgency, right? It's not that we have to do it because it's better, faster, whatever. I mean, it is better and faster, and it's going to happen. But I think we have to do it because of the inevitability. Because that if we do it, we're going to be fundamentally behind our most, capable adversaries.
Yeah. So right now, when we're talking about things falling apart, in the current scenario, so in those moments, what tends to break first? Is it the people or the process or the tooling?
It depends. And the adversary is very opportunistic. I once did a podcast for something called Fishy Business. It was either Risky Business or Fishy Business, one of the two. It's a Spotify podcast. And in that podcast, I said that the adversary is like water. Think about the nature of water, right? You ever watch water like go down the stream, throw the rock in the stream? What does the water do? Does the water get angry? Does it get no? Kind of just different direction, right? You poke a hole in the
Mhm.
dam. Now the water's coming through that place. You put when I say that the adversary is like water, their ability to move and adapt is very fluid and then very rapid as well. Right?
Hmm.
Think about some of the changes in polymorphic malware. So polymorphic malware is basically malware that can change its appearance and change the way it operates. Polymorphic malware is not new. It was happening back like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. But now polymorphic malware can not only change its appearance, when it's on the environment, it now dynamically adapts and makes judgment calls and changes its capability on its own, right? And so going back directly to your question, what fails first, the people, process, or the technology? I think the answer is that it sort of depends on the situation. But to put it even more bluntly, and now to take this at a leadership level, the failure is always people, is it not? It's always a poor decision that we made. Our technologies and our processes do not exist in of themselves. They exist because a leader made a decision based off their understanding of the situation. And so I think part of this is from a defensive standpoint, our own ability to have accountability on how we think, right? And so I guess so I'll answer your questions in two ways. It depends, right? Depends on what the adversary is doing and how adaptable they can be. But at the end of the day, it's always people, right? Because we're the ones who decide processes, we're the ones who decide technology. Even in the future, when the agents are on the front line, it's still going to be people who decide which agents, how do those agents operate, what are their decision thresholds. And so that's for me how I think of it. It's at the end of the day, it truly is a people thing.
Right. That was a really good example, the water one. But then what does a live fire exercise expose that a tabletop simply cannot then?
So my answer again would be it depends, right? In cybersecurity, unfortunately, it is, and especially in less mature organizations, we often think of things as binary. Do I have the EDR or not have the EDR? Did I do the live fire exercise or not do the live fire exercise? Am I compliant or not compliant? We have these binary ways of thinking, and it's very comforting to be able to do the thing and check the box and pat yourself on the back and say, yes, I did it. And so more directly to answer your question with the live fire exercise, sure, it helps you to prepare. But then my question back to anyone, okay, but what kind of live fire exercise? How realistic was it? Did it actually incorporate your environment? Did it incorporate your tools? Did you practice against adversaries and threats that you are likely to face in real life? Or did you kind of just check the box and you played a video game thing and there was like fireworks and confetti at the end with a gold medal? Here you go. Here's your gold star. You did a good job. And that happens a lot, right? Because like again, this compliance mindset, this idea that we can check boxes and be okay. Again, directly going back to the question, a live fire exercises certainly help, right? Because there's really two ways to learn. You either learn by doing an exercise or education, or you learn by real life punching you in the face. And so, sure, let's do some education, right? But then, of course, it begs the question: what is the extent of that education, and what is the extent of the live fire exercise? And so, yeah, I mean, I guess it's one of those things where applying more urgency and applying more effort towards the thing will yield more results, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. So then, why do so many organizations still stop at tabletops?
Time, money, effort,
Mm.
stress. It's the same things that stop us in anything, right? Why? Why do we not finish that master's degree that we always wanted to finish? How come we never run that marathon we said we'd run? How come that project that we said we'd do and everyone was like, yeah, it's a good project. And then we kind of all, why does anything die on the vine? Right. And I think it's one of those things where, we're all limited, right? We're limited with our time. We're limited with our capability. We have lives, and especially when you go to smaller organizations, those limitations become more and more severe. I think anyone, right? Everyone wants to do a good job. Everyone wants to do the right thing. I think part of it is just those real world limitations. And so it's one of those things where like, not only what should I do, like what is the right way to do it, but then what is the best way to do it given my constraints, given my objectives, what is the best way for me to do something? Because the truth is, you're not always going to have all the money in the world. The truth is, you might not have all the time and you might not have all the capability. So, given those constraints, what is the best way we can do this? And I think the more that we honestly ask ourselves the question, the better off we are. Whereas the more that we just kind of let's check the box, that's where the danger comes from. And so it's a mentality thing, right? How do we get in this mentality of doing the best we can, given the constraints and the limitations that we have?
Right. That totally makes sense. So now, shifting our focus a little bit on whether the tools actually work. Since testing is where you have spent most of your time now, it's worth asking about the tools themselves and not just the teams running them, right? So, my next question would then be, when you test the products organizations have already bought, what is the gap you see most often between what a tool claims to stop and what it actually stops in practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think like there are many. So, like, let's take any tool, whether it's an EDR, a SIEM, a firewall, identity, whatever, right? It's one thing for something to work in theory. It is another thing for something to work in real life. And so let's take a tool or a weapon or anything. Let's take a weapon first, right? An aircraft, a drone, artillery, right? Part of understanding
Mhm.
whether that weapon works is using that weapon in realistic conditions. And so, for example, the military, whether it be the US military, the NATO alliance, or any advanced military in the world, is constantly training, testing, and validating under realistic conditions. And so when you think about this within the cybersecurity tool space, that's sort of a difficult thing to do, right? Like, how do you validate under real world conditions? Sure, we have pen tests and we have breach and attack simulations, but here's what I can tell you with certainty. There is no pen tester and there is no breach and attack simulation capability that is going to deploy ransomware on your environment. There is no pen tester
Mhm.
or BAS tool that's going to blow something up in real life. There's no pen tester or BAS tool that's going to take your data and put it on the dark web, right? There's only a certain extent that these capabilities will go within the cyber domain. Because what they don't want to do is cause real damage. Therein lies the solution of a simulation, right? Because for me to know the truth, getting back to this decision capability, right? If I'm going to make a good decision, I must know the truth, not the truth I want to hear, but the full extent of the truth. And for me to understand that full extent of the truth, I have to be able to test against the worst of all possible circumstances. And so for me, testing is about not just looking at the claim and not just doing it in a nice, pretty place where everything works, but doing it in a messy place where things don't work, where life is falling apart, where attacks are constantly happening, where weird stuff is happening on the internet, on the network, right? Like, for example, I have a printer behind me. Maybe in my simulation, the printer should break. Maybe the printer should be the point of entry, or maybe it should be some type of network flaw. But where I'm going with this is that real life is messy, real life is dangerous. And so we get that in the physical sense, but we don't get it in the cyber sense, right? And so when I think, going back to your question, when I think about tool testing, for me, the evolution comes when we realize that it is no longer, we can't just test in these safe, easy environments. We have to test in these dirty, dangerous environments. 'Cause that, to me, it's the next stage, right? Because we don't have time anymore. We don't have the luxury of time and adaptation. Things are getting faster. Things are getting more severe. Look at Mythos,
Mhm.
right? Look at what what the U.S. government said on Mythos. Some of the leaks about its capability. I mean, and I'm just paraphrasing here. I don't have any inside information, but according to open source, Mythos breached the
Mhm.
NSA 2 hours, 2 3 hours, right? So if Mythos can do that, then what does that mean for our tools? What does that mean for our level of preparation? Are we doing this correctly? I think those are things that we have to ask ourselves. And I think it's very relevant to what you say about tool testing, right? What is the correct way to test tools?
Okay. Yeah. Then for security leader who has never stress tested their stack, what is then the realistic first step to find out whether the tools actually work?
Yeah, I think the realistic first step for me is first understanding your own expectations and is this the right tool? Like what am I trying to accomplish? What is the problem I'm trying to solve? And then the tool, right? We often have this reverse understanding. I'm going to get the tool. I'm going to do the thing, whatever my boss says, whatever compliance says, but we don't have a problem focused mindset, right? So to me, the first step is like, do you even understand what you're doing? Do we understand why we're buying this thing? Do we understand what we hope to achieve? Because once you understand what you think you're doing and what you hope to achieve, then you can run a test, right? What is a test? I mean, a test to some degree, it's kind of like the scientific method, right? And we all go through this as children. What is the very first step of the scientific method? What's the hypothesis, right? The expectation of what might happen. And so for me, then the second step really is like once you have that understanding of the situation, you then develop a hypothesis, and the hypothesis itself is what allows you to construct the test, right? Because it's not only about the tool itself is operating within context. It's operating within the context of the environment, the critical assets, the subnets, how things are configured, the people, but then, of course, and also equally important, the adversary itself, right? And if you are not testing all of these things together in the same place, when you only do it in isolation, you get an isolated answer that doesn't represent the real world. And so for me, that's sort of the sequence, right? It's like, do I understand my objective? Do I have a hypothesis? And then can I set up a complete, realistic test environment that allows me to test my hypothesis against the ability to achieve the objective? For me, that's kind of the main areas of testing, at least from the way that I look at it.
Right. Right. Let's talk a bit about building threat intel now that matters. So, before your current work, you spent years on the intelligence side at Deloitte and CrowdStrike, which is its own version of this problem. So, knowing something versus acting on it, right? You have seen threat intelligence done well and done badly, like both. What separates intelligence that actually changes a decision from the reports that get produced and never read?
Sure. So an old adage, an old mantra of intelligence is that intelligence is timely, accurate, relevant, and predictive. Good intelligence possesses those four traits because if you are timely, you get the information in time. If you are accurate, you have the right understanding. If it's relevant, it matters to you. And if it's predictive, most importantly, helps you understand what might happen next. Those four things combined allow for action. I cannot take action on something that does not happen on time. I can take action on something, so on and so forth, right? So good intelligence, to sum it up, is actionable. Bad intelligence is noise and distracting. Intelligence can actually send you backwards. When intelligence is noisy, when intelligence is misleading, when intelligence is irrelevant, not only does it create more and more and more noise, which then distracts our attention, but then it lowers our understanding of the real life situation, right? And so intelligence itself is an evolving discipline, but the one thing that seems to be changing a lot in intelligence really is two features. It's the timeliness piece and the predictability piece. Those pieces appear to be strained. Think about intelligence back in the World War I, World War II days. In World War I, we were sending hot air balloons up to see over adversary lines, right? The hot air balloon would go up and they would observe a thing. And then they'd write a note, send a telegram back to I don't know, right? This process maybe takes days, a week, right? Speed up to when
Mhm.
we have modern, radio frequency or radio communications and satellite communications. Now it's happening faster. But now with AI, now it must happen even faster, right? And one of my concerns about intelligence is that in all intelligence, the nature of it is that it lives in the past. Every indicator of compromise happened in the past. Every threat report happened in the past. Every adversary profile we wrote is about who the adversary was in a time, not now, in a place, not here. Right. But then how do we become predictive, particularly when it's getting faster? And so for me, the evolution that's coming is that intelligence is going to go from proactive or predictive to preemptive. Intelligence must think of what the adversary is going to do before they do it. And that's why AI is a critical role. Plays a critical role, right? AI is what allows us to understand what the adversary will do before they do it. And so happy to explain that one further if you'd like, but also I definitely want to make sure we have time for more of your questions. But does that make sense overall about this idea of moving to preemptive?
Yeah, that does make sense. But then I think I have a follow-up question for that then. Like given a scenario, if a security leader, let's say, has a limited budget, which you also did say in like probably your question back, that that's quite the normal thing to happen. And like that person wants to build an entire function that matters. What is then the first capability they should invest in?
For me, intelligence is in many ways a function of the information that you possess. Good intelligence provides good information around actionable things that are relevant to your ability to make decisions. And so for an intelligence leader, my very first question to any intelligence leader is, do you actually understand yourself? Before you go and get threat feeds and go do whatever it is you think you're going to do, are you aware of your own stuff? Do you have access to your alerts? Do you have the right tools in place? Because if you're not collecting on yourself, then you might have a great understanding of the adversary, but then you can't apply that to who you are, right? And so that's one I think an intelligence leader needs to think through. But then beyond having good information on yourself, I think then the question is, why am I doing this? I think many intelligence leaders, they fail to ask themselves that question. What is the reason that I am doing this? Because if you don't know the reason that you're going to do something, well, then you're just going to do stuff, but it's not going to really get the results that you want to get. You can think of intelligence as a 4-step life cycle, right? There's planning and direction, collection and processing, analysis and production, and then dissemination and feedback. Like 4 steps, right? There's different versions. Some are 5 steps, some are 6 steps, some are 8 steps, but I'm a simple person, right? 4 steps. And so intelligence leaders often skip the first step. They go straight into collection, they go straight into analysis, they go into dissemination and releasing reports, but they don't understand the priority intelligence requirements. They don't understand why they're doing it. And so for me, that very first step is like, do you understand yourself? Do you understand what you want to do? Do you have information on yourself? And then from there, now you can go collect. Now you can analyze. Now you can disseminate. That's sort of the way that I would think about it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That definitely makes a lot of sense, to be honest. But I think then moving towards, you have now seen this industry from inside 3 different vendors, right? And on top of the operator and adversary sides. That's a useful vantage point to close on, to be honest. I would then like to ask you, you have worked inside several security vendors. So when a CISO is being pitched AI-driven defense today, what should they be most skeptical about? Because I think you touched base on AI like developing too fast, and from 2023 when ChatGPT came out till now, it was beyond comprehension. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the the skepticism that I often see is around the area of trust. The AI capability claims it can do a thing. It looks good in the demo, but how do I validate trust? And then in what location do I validate this trust? Not only trust, but also efficacy, right? I need to know that if I allow this thing to have control over aspects of my environment, I need to know that it's not going to behave destructively. For me, that's step one, right? Because it can be effective. Say it's great at finding alerts and triaging and doing whatever, but in the process, it's destroying business critical assets. Then it doesn't matter how good it is, right? Because I don't trust it. And so for me, that biggest thing that a lot of leaders are thinking through right now is the idea of trust. How do I know I can trust this, right? But then beyond trust, the next step you go to is it effective? It's one thing for something to work in theory. It's one thing for something to work during a demo or a presentation where there's cool slides and flashy stuff going on. It's another thing for something to be effective in real life, which gets back to this idea of realism. Whether it be trust or whether it be efficacy, I cannot know either of those things unless the situation in which I'm validating or testing is a realistic situation. And so to kind of sum it up, really, it's the trust and efficacy piece, but those things are further compounded by the need to apply your understanding of trust and efficacy within a realistic environment. And so that's sort of what I'm seeing CISOs and security leaders think through these days, because they all know it's inevitable. It's happening. It's happening right now. AI will be on the front lines everywhere within 5 years.
Mm.
I say that in almost every conversation that I'm in. Some people believe me, some people don't. Some people think it'll be faster, but I'm almost certain every single large organization will have AI on the front lines within 5 years. And so the question is, how do you get there? How do you do it in a manner where you know efficacy, where you can believe in the trust? And I think those are the things that people are trying to solve right now.
Right. So, chaining to that line, knowing that AI will take the forefront in a very short amount of time now. So, for a security leader who knows their organization is not ready and does not know where to start, what would you then tell them to do first?
I mean, always the basics first. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's hard to do anything advanced or anything, special and amazing and interesting, right? It's hard to do those things when you don't have the basics covered. And so, basic things like, do you have visibility in your environment, right? And I probably sound like you've probably heard this a million times, right? But if you don't have EDR, if you don't have visibility, if you can't see what's going on, then nothing else really matters. Please don't get AI. Please don't do other things until you have the basics, right? So there's the idea of visibility. Can I see what's going on? There's the idea of the capacity to respond, the capacities to contain, the capacity to isolate, to prevent, right? When you think about these core defensive functions, for me, the first step is always that. It's like, can I even do these? Because if life is on fire, if the building's falling down, things are in a mode of crisis, well, then there is no special project to go after, right? You're in a crisis. You need to solve the crisis. And so I think most intelligence security leaders are always knocking that out. But then it's one of those things where, like, once you realize you're doing the right thing, then the question is, am I doing it the right way? So, like, I have my EDR, I have my firewall, I have my tools, but am I even using them correctly? Am I doing so in a manner that's effective, or am I doing so in a manner that's wasteful? On top of that, once you know that if you're doing something the right way, now are you doing it the best way? And so you might be doing the right thing, but are you doing the right thing in the best way possible? Could you do it more effectively? Could you optimize better? Could you do it faster? Could you have spent less and achieve better, the same or better outcomes? And I think the best leaders are good at continuously challenging themselves and continuously iterating through that process. Poor leaders go through the process once and believe so much in their own decision making and so much in their own understanding of the situation that they fail to challenge themselves, which gets back to how we already started this conversation, right? Why does every breach happen? Every single breach
Mm.
happens because of a miscalculation or misunderstanding. And so for me, it's the ability to methodically go through that process, methodically, but then also humbly. Can you humbly accept when you are wrong? Can you not be offended by being wrong? Can you accept being wrong with grace and rapidly make a change, right? That's a big one too. How do you respond to a breach? How do you respond to a threat? And so it's complicated, right? I don't think there's one right answer, but the continual evaluation of yourself and the continual cycling through that process to me is one of the great hallmarks of a cybersecurity leader and something that I look for and advise clients upon whenever I work with them in different types of situations.
Right, right. That's interesting. Before we wrap up, so we don't have many questions, but then I'm just tempted to ask one basic question because we have had so many discussions. So, from a cybersecurity leader perspective, how has the job of security analyst, which is like one of the root like job roles there in cybersecurity, how has it changed in the last few years, and what should someone entering that field now be learning?
Yeah. I think the obvious answer is AI, right? But what does that even mean? What does it mean for AI
Yeah,
to
it's
change the
really
field?
broad. Yeah.
Yeah. I think AI is as significant as any of the most important inventions in human history. It is as significant as the vehicle. It's as significant as the internet. Just as significant as agriculture and energy, so on and so forth, right? And given its level of significance, I do not think there is a future where any security professional is in this industry who does not understand not only how AI operates, but also how to use it. There's something called the four S's in AI. And whenever anybody asks me about how to use AI, I almost always quote the four S's. The four S's are basically the things that AI is always, always better at than humans. Those are speed, scale, sophistication, stamina. It is faster. It does more. It's more sophisticated. It finds more linkages and does more interesting analytic things. And stamina. It never sleeps. And so I think the cybersecurity practitioners of the future, they don't ever go away, but they learn new skills that make them more effective. An analogy that I often use is like, you ever seen those like cartoons where somebody gets inside a giant robot and they fight people inside other giant robots? That's kind of what's about to happen. We're all about to put on our robot suits. And those robot suits are going to be powered by AI, and they're going to make us faster, scale more. They're going to make us more sophisticated, and they're going to make us be able to do things that our human capabilities cannot do. But then the thing and the challenge is that everybody's going to do that. It's not just the defenders that are doing that. It's the offense that's going to do that as well. And so I don't think that AI is going to massively replace cybersecurity professionals. I think it might in some areas, but at the same time, I think it might also increase the need for cybersecurity professionals because I think more things are going to happen, right? It might
Yeah.
make defense more effective. But if there are 10, 20, 30, 100 times more bad things happening, well, then I guess you need more defenders. Either you need more defenders or those defenders have AI helping them. And so I don't think the security profession goes away, but I think it does adapt to AI. And I think it does it at a much quicker rate than a lot of us previously thought might happen.
Right. That's interesting. So from what I learned, adaptability in the right direction would actually be the game changer for this. Great.
Yeah.
So Jason, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just being honest with yourself, right? I mean,
Okay.
do we see the problem? Do we see what's happening? Can we accept it? Can we humbly accept it? And then most importantly, can we respond and evolve in ways that are necessary in order to not only protect the organizations, but then of course to empower ourselves to continue to be relevant in this industry?
Right. Yeah. One more quick question then. What is something that you believed early in your career about nation state threats that you no longer believe?
I once believed that nation states had exceptionable, unmatched capabilities. I once believed that if you had all the money and all the technology and all the power in the world, that you could have your way on the battlefield. And beyond what I believe or don't believe anymore, just look at what's happening, right? It might not matter how much money or how much power or how much capability you might have. There are certain circumstances and certain things that might happen that change these assumptions. And so for me, the battlefield is sort of evening. I once wrote on this concept in 2014 about the idea of unconventional and asymmetric warfare. Asymmetric warfare is basically this idea that you have a more powerful adversary against a less powerful adversary. Those lines are blurring. Things like AI, things like drones, things like decentralized cryptocurrency wallets, all of these things are creating capabilities that allow those who have
Mm.
less capability and less funding to sort of even the playing field. So that's for me one of the main things that's changed. Nation states are not as powerful as they used to be, and power is beginning to become more and more distributed because of technological advancement.
All right. Right. So this has been a genuinely useful conversation, and I really appreciate you being so direct about where the real gaps are. We would now like to close. So to everyone watching, if this was useful, please follow InfoSec Relations and subscribe to InfoSec Leadership newsletters where we publish the full analysis drawn from conversations like this one. And thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you once again, Jason, for being with us. Thank you.